What are the most surprising things that you're learning about UAP and potential underwater UAP or USO? Is there anything that stands out to you as an aha moment or something that really piqued your interest that got you further into the field?
Well, I guess for me personally, one large aha moment was when I realized that, at the Galileo project, we're building these ground-based systems, but there's so much out there that we're missing. I mean, 70% of the planet is covered by water, and 90% of that water has not been explored. There's so much out there that we just don't know about our own oceans. We know more about space and moon than we do about our oceans, and it turns out that so many reports that are made about UAP, credible reports from the military, involve water. And so at that point where I realized, wow, I've got this network, these connections, the skills, the resources, let's go ahead and let's see what we can do and bring the same kind of approach from the Galileo project to the oceans. And that was I think a pivotal moment in how I've viewed UAP and my approach.
Additionally to what Richard is saying, we have been working on this for a couple of years, and to understand where what kind of objects we have, where they are, where do they come from, it's extremely important in terms of targeting and intuitively following our dreams. But what struck me, people who never believed in UFOs, how easily they accept the idea of UAPs as long as you start talking about it, and it suddenly topic become more larger than it was before. So if you have a few folks who never believed it and they make fun on it, as soon as you expose a little bit of information and you start telling them there is a scientist who dedicate their time on that, they switch their opinion within seconds.
We have the situational awareness out there to actually detect it in time, with the data being of scientific quality, so we can make proper conclusions about what we are observing and understand from a scientific perspective if it is something that's actually novel or it's something mundane.
There's talk about a secretive arms race for technologies of potential non-human origin, and that these technologies might have unknown ramifications for the global community. When we imagine a reverse-engineered alien reproduction vehicle, as it is being surmised, possibly a triangle, an orb, an object the size of an SUV or a small aircraft, imagine instead an underwater craft the size of a football field, going hundreds of knots, chasing nuclear-powered and nuclear-armed submarines. If you don't understand why we need ocean sensing and the ability to detect, monitor, and better understand the presence of these anomalous craft in the ocean, then I think that says it pretty much full on. So there couldn't be a more important domain for us to increase our awareness and responsiveness within, and to facilitate coordinated international response to. Welcome to Emergent, the podcast where we examine the reality of unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAP, as well as the potential reality of non-human intelligence. I'm your host, Reed Summers. It's a pleasure to be back with two guests who are at the forefront of UAP science and detection efforts. Today, we're going to be examining the underwater anomaly side of UAP, what are known as USOs, underwater submerged objects, essentially UFOs that are water-based. I'm joined today by Richard and Andriy of Seeker, a cutting-edge technology platform with a mission that intersects with the questions of the public regarding anomalous objects and potential vehicles in our skies and seas, and the need to gather credible and reliable data regarding the UAP phenomenon to advance our scientific understanding and our ability to research and gain key insights into the origin and intent of unidentified anomalous phenomena. Today, we're going to dive into 4 topics. First, we're going to explore the hidden ocean frontier of the UAP phenomenon. We're going to discuss USOs, underwater submerged objects, and transmedium craft. We'll talk about data transparency and citizen science. And then finally, we'll have a conversation about the drone enigma, disclosure of UAP to the public, and the future of our scientific and research understanding of UAP. So before I welcome Richard and Andriy on the show, I'll read their bios and then we will dive right in. Dr. Richard Cloete is the CEO of Seeker Robotics, a pioneering startup developing unmanned surface vehicles and advanced sensor systems to deliver real-time global situational awareness across the marine domain. Seeker's technology is designed to detect, track, and characterize aerial, surface, and submerged objects while simultaneously collecting critical oceanographic and atmospheric data. The company has developed one of the leading detection and tracking models tailored for marine environments and is currently building its minimum viable product, MVP, in collaboration with an international team to rigorously test and validate the system. Richard is also a core member of the Galileo project and a postdoctoral research fellow at the Center for Astrophysics at Harvard and the Smithsonian, where he has spent the last 3 years working at the intersection of astrophysics and machine learning. His work focuses on developing ground-based aerial surveillance systems powered by advanced AI to identify and classify candidate aerial anomalies. He is also involved in creating machine learning models aimed at detecting interstellar objects in data from the forthcoming Vera C. Rubin Observatory. Also with us is Dr. Andriy Fedorenko. Dr. Andriy Fedorenko is the CTO, Chief Technology Officer of Seeker, where he leads technological innovation for ocean exploration. He also serves as a data scientist for Harvard University's Galileo project, contributing to the development of advanced systems to study unidentified aerial phenomena using machine learning and multi-sensor observatories. His work bridges cutting-edge technology and scientific discovery across ocean and atmospheric frontiers. Richard and Andriy, welcome to Emergent.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Great to have you guys here. We met at the Seoul Symposia last November in San Francisco, and we're able to talk a little bit, and I learned about your project Seeker, SEAQR, which is seeking to detect marine anomalies in the ocean system. I think there's a variety of kind of purposes and objectives, but one of which is UAP detection in the sea. So it felt like an immediate have to have you guys on the show to talk about your work, what you're detecting, any insights that you're gleaning as to the nature of the UAP phenomenon in the sea. So it's a pleasure to have you both here. To get us started, just tell us a bit about how you got involved in this field and what makes you passionate to contribute to advancing our knowledge of unidentified anomalous phenomena.
Well, I've always been interested in UAP and UFOs since being a small kid. And so it's always been something that's gone with me throughout my childhood and teenage years and into adulthood. And I've been watching, who's involved in that sphere, who's contributing to the research, what kind of efforts are ongoing. And at some point, while I was at the University of Cambridge, I was thinking how I would like to have a ground-based sensor system very similar to the Galileo project. And being a lowly postdoc at that point and not having any network or funding or anything like that, I kind of put everything on a back burner. And then one day I saw this article in Scientific American written by Professor Avi Loeb, and it basically laid out this vision of the Galileo project, and that really connected with me because I'd been thinking of something similar while at Cambridge. And my initial thoughts was basically, I'm not going to get anywhere with this. It's too complicated. I'm not going to be able to build this myself. And my wife pressed me. She said, reach out to Avi, email Avi. And, so I did that. Avi got in contact with me pretty shortly after that. And things went from there. And the next minute I was on the Galileo project. And then a little while later in Harvard.
Great. All right. Andriy, how about yourself? How did you get involved in this wild world of UAP and other phenomena?
Right. It's pretty much a very unusual topic. I wouldn't have imagined that I had a chance to work on this type of projects. Most of my technical skills were in applied physics and math, and they were really focused, IT focused or biophysics focused. I have this some sort of intuition regarding the future perspective of where the world will be, in 100,000 million years. And the idea was to follow the intuition and whatever technical skills and knowledge I have is better be to apply and utilize in these type of interesting topics that are looking forward ahead in the future rather than in the present or in the past, something like that.
Great. Something like that. Well, that sounds like what we need. So thank you both for your work on this issue and your work with the Galileo project. I know Avi's a great networker, and he brings together people from lots of different fields and converges them upon real field research. And we appreciate that a lot. Before we dive into your project and the insights that you've gleaned from it, just in your time working on this issue, whether with Galileo or with Seeker or even just as a student of the phenomenon, what are the most surprising things that you're learning about UAP and potential underwater UAP or USO? Is there anything that stands out to you as an aha moment or something that really piqued your interest that got you further into the field?
Well, I guess for me personally, one large aha moment was when I realized that, at the Galileo project, we're building these ground-based systems, but there's so much out there that we're missing. I mean, 80% of the, well, 70% of the planet is covered by water, and 90% of that water has not been explored. There's so much out there that we just don't know about our own oceans. We know more about, space and moon than we do about our oceans. And it turns out that so many reports that are made about UAP, credible reports from the military, involve water. And so at that point where I realized, wow, I've got this network, these connections, the skills, the resources, let's go ahead and let's see what we can do and bring like the same kind of approach from the Galileo project to the oceans. And that was I think a pivotal moment in how I've viewed UAP and my approach.
Yeah, go ahead, Andriy. Yes, please.
I can add. Yeah, I can add to that. So, additionally to what Richard is saying, we have been working on this for a couple of years, and to understand where what kind of objects we have, where they are, where do they come from. It's extremely important in terms of targeting and intuitively following our dreams. But what strikes me, people who never believed in UFOs, how easily they accept the idea of UAPs as long as you start talking about it, and it suddenly topic become more larger than it was before. So if you have a few folks who never believed it and they make fun on it, as soon as you expose a little bit of information and you start telling them there is a scientist who dedicate their time on that, they switch their opinion within seconds. That's probably the most striking part for me. People.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people are so much more open to this than we might think, and we just have to step around the ridicule factor that's been generated, and you find people are curious and open. I think they sense this is part of their reality, that there are anomalies that are outside our framed understanding of reality itself. And they want to know. So, you guys are working on the forefront of these initiatives to gain real, credible scientific insight into what is out there or down there, we might say, in the ocean. And, as we begin to look at this, I'm curious, from your work with Seeker especially, are there any surprising things you're learning about underwater anomaly detection that might inform either UAP research or how the public should be viewing UAP?
Well, to be honest, we're still very early stage. We haven't been to the point yet where we're actually deploying sensor networks to the oceans. So it's hard to say how that's going to evolve as our experiments change and as our network grows. But one thing is for sure is that a large number of the reports do involve water. And as I mentioned earlier, most of that is completely ignored. There's no monitoring at sea. We've got all the reports that come in are basically from the military, and those are the guys who have the sensors out there. They're the ones with the high-tech sensors, so they're in a position to capture information. And we're hoping to change that. But maybe one thing, just through these exploratory phases that we're going through, is understanding how little and how difficult it is to access data. I mean, there's plenty of marine-based data out there, but it's usually very siloed data. So you would go to one organization and you get access to some data. It would be through some weird web portal that looks like it's built in the 90s or something. It'll be a huge dump of data, but then that data would be maybe in a different format or a different fidelity to data that you would get from another portal, another website. So there doesn't seem to be any sort of uniform, easily accessible database out there that people can tap into and build machine learning models off of and do the kind of work that we're trying to do in the ocean.
Yeah, great. We're going to get into that a lot, about the data that Seeker would collect and how other researchers or other organizations could access and fuse with it. Interestingly, just to reflect on how we've had a shift in language from UFO to UAP, unidentified flying object, to unidentified aerial object, UAP. That was the original UAP acronym, and now it's unidentified anomalous phenomena. And so it's like we're allowing for this to be in the domains of not just the air, but also the sea. And as you pointed out, Richard, 80% of the Earth is water, 90% of that is unexplored. And if UAP are a global pervasive phenomena that is transiting our skies every day at high rate and high volume, wouldn't that also carry into the ocean? And we'll get into this topic of transmedium, this transmedium capability that is one of the 5 observables of UAP. But it's so important, even critical, that we begin to gain access to our own ocean environment. It's like the basement of our house, but we don't have the key, but somebody else does. And something else could be using that environment, transiting it in ways that we don't understand. So let's dive into Seeker. Let's talk about what is this initiative, this project? Is it an organization? What prompted its development, and where does it stand now in terms of being an actual deployed system gathering data?
Okay, sure. Well, Seeker is a for-profit company. It was established about a year ago, and we are currently through our MVP1 development. But the basic idea is to build a network of what are known as uncrewed surface vehicles. And these you can think of as essentially autonomous boats, observatories, if you like, on the ocean, collecting data from below the surface of the water, on the surface of the water, and the skies above. So the idea is to essentially build out this large-scale network that can persistently and consistently monitor these multiple domains, and at the same time perform anomaly detection. So doing object detection, tracking, characterization, and then actually figuring out whether what's being observed is something that doesn't really fit the known performance or biological envelopes of known phenomena and objects. And so that's what the ultimate aim is, to be able to have this large scale networked fleet of unmanned surface vehicles, so that if something does appear, we have the situational awareness out there to actually detect it in time, with the data being of scientific quality, so we can make proper conclusions about what we are observing and understand from a scientific perspective if it is something that's actually novel or it's something mundane.
I've got the Seeker website up here. We can go full screen on that. There's a little visualization of one of these. I think your website calls it an ocean sentinel. And,
yes.
and this global network of ocean sentinels operating, I would presume, 24/7, feeding data back up to the cloud. If I may pepper you both with a few operational questions, what amount of the Earth's ocean surface would this project be able to monitor if fully deployed, fully funded, fully deployed?
Well, the ultimate goal is, of course, cover as much of the ocean as possible. We want to be able to cover, you can imagine taking the Earth as a sphere and putting a grid around it, and then each cell has a Seeker USV in there. You can't keep things perfectly stationary on the ocean. That's, the ocean is too rough, so things are going to move around, and we understand that. So, and it's also a big place out there, so we can't possibly expect to cover every square inch of the ocean. But what we can do is have Seeker USVs essentially monitoring cells of the ocean. So each cell in the grid, for example, being monitored by one of these USVs in a circle or whatever, and then constantly feeding information back to our headquarters or back to our customers.
Right,
yeah, and
great.
I can add to that. So most of these cells that Richard mentioned is going to be point of our interest. So if we know that there is interesting sightings or interesting activities going on, regardless what it is, right? Perhaps it can be UAPs, it can be some animals or any sort of other activities. The idea is to deploy them, the network of the vehicles, so then we can accumulate data, get them, and do AI.
So it's more a case that we would have these USVs in as many of these cells as possible, so that if something does come along, that USV is there and able to detect and track it at the spot. These are not going to be like high speed USVs that are chasing UAP. They're more of observation stations that are positioned and ready to sitting there, ready and waiting for that moment when something unusual pops up.
I see. Okay. And in terms of the anomalies that these USVs might detect, what would that be beyond potential anomalous biological life? Are we talking only USO or UAP, or are there other detection goals of the project?
Right. So there are two kind of concepts. One is the outlier concept, which is the scientifically and statistically defined the group of outliers in our data set. And those can be anything. It can be fishes, it can be unknown species that we found, it can be birds in the skies. But there is an anomaly, something that is unusual. And that's there is a very thin edge and kind of transparent border where you can sometimes they overlap, these two kind of these two different groups of outliers and anomalies. So the idea is to eventually identify anomaly. Yeah, and by collecting the data, collecting the from multi-sensor and getting data from multi-sensors, we hope to identify and differentiate anomaly among outliers.
Okay, so let's imagine that an underwater submerged object or a UAP is detected, airport radar, military installation radar, and it's detected as going into the sea. I'm thinking of the Aguadilla case in Puerto Rico, for example, where this object was tracked, and I believe it split into multiple objects. It might have recombined, but then it went transmedium, which is to say it went from air to sea. If one of the seeker sentinels were in that area, how would it be able to go and detect that, or would it be more in a passive detect mode where if that were to transit its path, it would gather data on that potential craft?
Definitely the second one, the passive mode.
Okay, the latter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So something is coming within range of seeker USV. That's why it's important to have this network and have the nodes in this network, the USVs, communicating so that they can alert one another that something unusual has popped up on our sensor system. Get ready, so that the USV could do some potential movements and preparatory work for a potential UAP on its way.
Okay. And in terms of the data collected, is it going to give insight into the size of the craft, the structure of the craft, or more just simply that there was an anomalous object that met your standards, your detection standards, operating in ways that would not be accountable per biological life forms or so forth? What would the actual data be able to tell us?
Well, we definitely want to be able to tell things about its size, because if we can't tell its size, we can't tell how fast it's moving, let's say, or its distance. So distance, size, speed, these are all very important metrics to be able to figure out whether what we're seeing is an airplane or a bird or a mylar balloon or space debris or whatever. And so our seeker USVs will definitely be aiming to be able to provide those metrics. And that's part of the strategic reason for having the network of these USVs, because if you have them separated by some distance, you can perform triangulation of objects in the sky, and you can derive all those metrics.
What would be, I'm sure the listeners are probably wondering just some of the basic parameters here, like what would be the detectable range of one sentinel, both laterally, down into the sea, up into the air?
That's a super hard question, and I wish I had a super straight answer for that. But honestly, it's just going to take time before we've got the sensors out there and properly tested our system. But I could give a ballpark figure and say probably around 10 to 20 kilometers distance. Below the water is
in all directions.
Well,
distance
above the water and on the sea surface.
Okay.
I would say that below the water is a bit more challenging because it's a lot more opaque and difficult for signals to propagate there. So that would really be entirely dependent on our sonar systems.
Okay. Are we talking like dozens of feet, hundreds of feet, quarter mile, or still yet to be determined?
I would say just based on like readily available sensors on the market, not talking about like military grade or anything like that, I would say a couple of kilometers.
Wow, that's pretty deep.
Yeah.
You know, given
Yeah.
So that's meaningful depth perception regarding what's down there, and I'm sure would be very interesting to marine biologists as well to understand animal life, whale movements and so forth. So fascinating. Where are you guys at in the project in terms of making it a reality?
Well, we've come a very long way. We are in the process right now of building out our MVP, our model, our minimal viable product, and I think we're scheduled to have that at least ready to go within a month or two.
Okay.
And so that will be the first time we're actually doing some proper, like, out of the box, outside, let's say, outdoor tests of the system, collecting some real world data. But with these things, it's all completely unknown territory, especially for us. We haven't done anything marine based before, so it's going to be a very iterative process. So yeah.
Are there other ocean sensing instruments or technical platforms out there already that are giving us data about potential anomalous objects under the sea?
Not anomalous, not too many people. So there are scientific projects that support the whales tracking fisheries that do scientific research underwater. There is famous MBARI research institution that is located in California, Monterey. So they do a lot of biological sampling. But in terms of anomalies, the way how we try to address it, nobody does it. And that's probably the novelty. And the most important one is that we deliver the anomaly detection into the ocean, multi-sensor one. And that's probably how we stand out compared to other research institutions.
Yeah.
So current state is it? Oh, go ahead, Richard.
I'd just like to add, like, there's also, Seeker is not unique in the perspective that we're building sensors for the ocean. It's a big industry. There's competitors out there. And some of those are quite developed, like Saildrone, for example, is a very well-known company, or Liquid Robotics. But exactly as Andriy mentioned, these guys are not doing the kind of anomaly detection that we're doing. They're not looking to provide persistent, consistent monitoring of locations. What typically happens is these guys have a mission that are delegated by their clients, and their USV goes out there, that collects the data and it returns back to base and hands the data over to the customer, and that's the end of it. Next week, you have no idea what's happening in that location. So Seeker from that perspective and the anomaly detection is really where we differ.
Yeah, this stood out to me so fast when I was talking to you guys at the Soul Foundation conference, this persistent and consistent monitoring as a fundamental territorial sovereign detection and protection potentially capability on behalf of the global community, certainly a nation state or a company, but it's like humanity needs this capability to be able to understand its oceans and detect potential craft operating there. So this really stood out, and I'm even more so hearing that there really aren't any other technological platforms out there that are doing ocean sensing in this pervasive and consistent way that Seeker would seek to do.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for conceiving this very unique and necessary project here. I'm curious, I know you're not out there in the ocean yet. You don't have an anomaly detection device floating in the sea as we speak, but is there any insight into anomalous objects in the oceans that you have come into contact with? Information, research that might be a starting point for people to understand the nature of the phenomenon as it exists? in the water-based environment.
Well, I can take it, Richard, then you can continue, right? So I don't know
Sure.
what comes first. Yes. So look, all of these observations of the UAPs in the air and in the water, at the end of the day, seems to be they merged. Some of the objects, they stay purely in the air. Some of the objects, they can fly from the air into the water. And some of the objects seems to be in the water consistently. And the first observations, so, we know historically came from one of this, flying saucer mythology of Utsuro Bun. I think it was in Japan when the 19th, maybe 18th century, when the object came out of the water and they just kind of float closely to the shore. And the woman came out with a script, trying to tell something. So it seems to be people observe the things for quite for a long period of time. Not only in the water, but also in the air. So some of the ancient drawings and paintings that you can observe have drawings of objects in the skies. And so it's can be partially related to mythology and religion, right? But suddenly we see that these things exist in real life. The variety and spectrum of them are very different. We know that there are objects that can, the one I think that was mentioned by David Fravor in one of the podcasts, that they can fly and merge into the water and they can traverse the water surface, go under and persistently move without any friction. And then some of the objects that can go from under the water and they can stay and they can float under the water. We know from one of our Soul Conference speakers that most of the time they appear during the military training. And so one of the objects appeared under the water and has size twice as large as the actual submarine. And they maneuver and their capabilities are extraordinary. They can do things that move quickly and fast, and they are not bothered by any water or any sort of presence of people whatsoever. So one of the example I've heard, and I don't know if I can mention that, but it's kind of probably public already. That's one of the military were I think it happened somewhere near San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as the military started to test some sort of active acoustic system, they have a couple of spheres appearing on the top of the water. And so 70% of chance when they do it, the two objects show up. But at the end of the training, which if I'm not mistaken, lasts for a couple of weeks, there was a large sort of like a submarine approached them at extremely high speed. And that thing was like twice as large as actual submarine that people built. And it positioned itself under their cargo, under the military ship. And they follow the ship while they're doing their testing. And as soon as they switch off the equipment, as soon as they stop testing, that thing just go deep inside. They saw it on the radar, but they were never able to understand what is it. Some of the witnesses claim back in the days in USSR that the submarine people, they've identified some sort of objects, they call them quackers, and these are the objects that emit some sounds in a specific pattern, but they couldn't identify what are those. And most of the things in the water, they either undetectable because you cannot see them, but you can listen to them, or like, for example, jellyfish that can come out of the water, fly in the sky, or do opposite.
Okay, and you're talking about the jellyfish
Yes.
type or structured UAP that's been reported.
Yes.
Interesting.
You have two objects. One of them are staying under, and they are large and they're big. Another one, they can traverse. They kind of exist in both medias. It's also very strange. So,
You mentioned in the San Diego case that, did you say 70% of the time that they activated this acoustic monitoring device, that was it these orbs that would appear?
Yes.
Okay. That's interesting. I know Skywatcher is attempting to use both mechanical and psionic signaling techniques to try to get a response from UAP, and they're getting almost complete response rates from the technological and potential psionic They call it a dog whistle to basically to bring these craft into their vicinity. So interesting that these craft may respond to the activation, deactivation of certain sensing instrumentation platforms, especially on board military craft. I've been looking at the UAP USO issue as best I can. Richard Dolan has a new book out, which seems to be kind of the Bible of USOs to guide us into the modern era. There are reports of underwater submerged objects the size of a football field moving at hundreds of knots. I think I have heard either it was from retired Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, or it might have been via Lou Elizondo, that one of these was actually pursuing a submarine. This was reported by the commander of the sub. It was multi-sensor detection. This object was pursuing the sub at a super high speed. Might it have been like 250, 300, 350 knots, something like that, and then made a bizarre underwater maneuver that would not be possible by any known underwater craft, and disappeared at a high speed. So an object that big moving at that speed underwater definitely suggests that either there's a foreign adversary that has a capability that we've not accounted for, our own government has black budget technologies that they haven't accounted for, or that there is some form of technology operating in the world that is not of human origin. And if so, that's a big craft. I mean, in my mind, that kind of suggests more than a fleeting science experiment and something more like a programmatic engagement or an attempt to become sighted or stationed in the world's oceans. And I think the UAP phenomenon is beginning to suggest that this is more of a down and in versus an up and out observational phenomenon. There seems to be some locus upon certain coastlines, urban centers, nuclear facilities, military installations, and also a locus of craft activity that might suggest possibly some kind of base of operations or center of operations under the sea. So, I know UAPX has done a lot of work to detect anomalous UAP craft movements around Catalina Island off the coast of LA. And so, to gain better insight into the concentration of UAP USO activity, the patterns of activity, spatially, geographically, circumstantially, I think we can begin to run some serious analysis and gain insight into the potential scenarios at play in terms of what are these craft doing? What are they responding to? Who are they attempting to engage? Especially if it turns out that they are operated by some form of non-human intelligence. So really important stuff. I wanted to ask you both if you could define transmedium for the audience. I know that's a term that's being used a lot these days. What is a transmedium object?
It's just any object that is able to move from one medium to another. So an object going from the sky into the ocean or vice versa would be considered obviously transmedium. Just like something that managed to fly into solid rock, as we've heard of reports before as well, from the environment, that would also be transmedium. I think that's really all there is to the definition.
And would you both imagine? I mean, how do you see UAP as a primarily aerial object or craft that is engaging with the water, or as potentially something that is more water based, temporarily exiting the water and moving through the aerospace environment?
Well, Reed, you hit some really interesting points a little earlier when you mentioned about being able to basically gather data from the ocean, where we don't have any monitoring out there at the moment, and in reality we have no idea what's going on, right? The only people who are doing any monitoring, as we spoke about earlier, is really the military. So we don't know how prevalent UAP incidents really are at sea, and that's really a core motivation of Seeker as well, is to be able to help elucidate some of this information, try to understand better what is actually happening out at sea where there's no monitoring. How often are these events occurring? What kind of events are occurring? So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and with 1 to 2 kilometers of potential penetration downward, that's a lot of potential insight into an environment in which we have zero insight. So we're going from nothing to quite something pretty fast.
Right. And I want to add also, to your discussion, guys, is that There are many different type of ideas of what UAPs can be, in aerial and submerged ones, including biologics. Like, imagine those are animals, right? We don't know like what the evolution path is. So if we have 4.5 billion years of the Earth, then like how long does it take for the species to evolve, and what that final stage will be? And evolution doesn't stop. There is a vector of evolution, the direction where evolution goes. So humans are relatively recent, so we don't know which transformation, what type of animals, what type of species we may encounter. Perhaps those are animals, perhaps not. So that's why our initiative is trying to address these questions and trying to maybe cluster differentiate to identify and make it probably more visible, more clear on what we're looking at.
Right. Yeah. What are the kind of standards of evidence you guys might articulate for the detection of an anomalous object? What are the parameters you're attempting to detect? What would be required to report back to whether it's society at large or a federal agency to say, hey, we detected this object and we know it's not this and this and this, and we know it is this. What are you guys hoping to substantiate?
Well, first of all, so obviously we want to have very highly calibrated sensors out there. Having your sensors which are calibrated, you can rely on, you understand, that's kind of like the baseline. We need to be able to have this capability to be able to make any sort of conclusions. But we also want to pay close attention to different parameters. For example, we talked earlier about maybe acoustic signatures or changes in the environment or objects captured on video and things like that. But also really important is actually analyzing the kinematics of the objects, so how they move. So whether that's in the sky or in the water below, how they move is going to tell us a lot more than anything else, I think, in terms of what these objects are and whether they truly are anomalous. Because we can model the, let's say, performance envelope of an aircraft or of a submarine or a boat or a bird and a whale or whatever. We already know these things. They're around us. We've interacted with them before. We have data on them. We can figure these things out. So being able to actually model, or being able to collect kinematic data about the movement and trajectories, behaviors of UAP is really going to help us differentiate whether something is actually acting in a unusual way versus known phenomena and objects.
Yeah, I know Mitch Randall's project Skywatch, passive radar tracking of UAP. Mitch and we talk a lot, and he's argued that basically identifying these anomalous kinematic tracks, these flight paths that would not be achievable by any known aircraft, along with accelerations beyond what any power potential or propellant could provide, would be possibly one of the most high impact ways of verifying a true UAP event. And so interestingly, in the underwater space, what would that look like? What is an anomalous kinematic track, or an anomalous, is it acceleration? What is it? What would really prove undeniably that this is an anomalous craft of potential non-human origin?
It's pretty much the same as above the water in the sky. So if you have, for example, we can take the use case you mentioned earlier of the object tracking the submarine, approaching it really quickly and then tailing it and then zipping off. So if we detected something approaching a submarine at a high rate of speed and we saw it tailing and then zipping off in a different direction, if we had the proper kinematics of that, we would be able to understand, like, how is that moving in comparison to other submarines, or how is that moving in comparison to torpedoes, which is, I think, what they initially thought was happening, which caused the submarine commander to dive to almost crush depth. So being able to tease out that kind of information is going to help us differentiate whether something is unusual or not. But also really important is being able to detect these events on different sensors, and maybe even more important, on separate independent seeker platforms. So if we have, for example, 2 seeker USVs, both observing the same object at the same time, that's really, really strong evidence, because suddenly now we've got multiple independent cooperating platforms all saying the same thing. And it's much harder to say, oh, this is sensor anomaly, or this is some data anomaly, or something like that.
Right, right. Yeah, multi-sensor and then multi-platform detection for corroboration. So, I'm sure the equipment failure is always an issue and can be a problem. Your website talks about increasing our situational awareness of anomalous objects. And I thought for a moment, well, what are the situations? What is that situation that we need to be prepared for, that someone would need to act upon? And I think you called one out, which is if a submarine thinks it's being pursued by a torpedo, it's an emergency. It's evasive maneuvers. You go down to crush depth. You could potentially damage the vehicle. You could potentially have loss of life. So, this is consequential, no matter what the origin ends up being of the objects. If we can't understand what is potentially tailing a nuclear-powered submarine in a potential war zone, for example, that could create an incident, a miscalculation, a miscommunication between superpowers even. Here, actually, if I may, I think back to the era of the Cold War between the U.S. and the USSR, when there were well over a dozen incidents of near nuclear launch due to a variety of either technological error, user error, miscommunication, and so forth. And so, that was a hair trigger time in the history of human civilization. And we are not that far from that time. There are still nuclear-powered and nuclear-armed underwater vehicles going around the world every day. And if we have craft that can go 400 knots and are double their size and are pursuing them and obstructing their movements, and potentially we talk about air safety, near collisions in the air. The potential for a near collision under the water is certainly an option, potential too.
Right. There is another potential threat, right? We don't know what these objects are, and if someone's going to catch them, let's say, for some reason, somehow they do reverse engineering in these technologies, then perhaps United States or any other country will not have any advantages. It's going to be pretty much winning game. So that's why I think that's what was mentioned in one of these hearings in Congress. It's a national threat, and that's the reason why probably UAPs are not going to hunt us just because they don't do it. They seem to communicate with us in a certain way, and they can deliver the harm on our vehicles too, because we know that they do very powerful electromagnetic fields, and they can pretty much switch off the equipment on our crafts and vehicles. But that's probably the maximum that they did. The danger comes from humans. If humans can get it, they can use it against the humans.
Sure. There's threat, but then there's hazard. We are a world divided, 190 countries. Every country has its own military industrial complex, pretty much. And so the potential for miscommunication and miscall is ever present, not to mention so many other hazards. There are incidents of UAP potentially engaging in physical kinetic altercations with craft. There have been incidents of aircraft disappearing and never being recovered after an encounter with a UAP. So I know it's not a predominant in the record, but it is there. But yeah, the threat is in part us not knowing, and the world goes about its daily affairs not knowing what's in its skies or under the water. And so, that is an ever-present challenge. I want to talk to you guys about the data side. I know for many data, we are in the era of big data. Data is God, and to be able to run AI and machine learning analysis upon a data set is a whole new capability that needs to be leveraged. So where would the data go from the Seeker project? How would it be accessed? Who would have access? And how could that potentially fuse with other data sets collected by other organizations?
Well, the data sets are going to be streamed real time from our Seeker USVs to our servers, and there'll be kind of two modes of operation. One will be almost like a USV as a service per se, where as a company, as an organization, research or industry or whatever, you want to go and task a mission. You want to be able to go and collect data for a particular point in time, of a particular quality in a particular location. And you would task Seeker USVs to go out there, or maybe they're already there, collect the data and send it back to you. And all that data will be accessible through the dashboard. But then in addition to this kind of USV as a service model, we would also have these longitudinal data sets. So after collecting data for a long period of time, we will be able to finally start looking at data that spans multiple years from the same locations. And so all that data as well would be accessible through our web portals. And when it gets to a point where it's too big, then it'll be through data storage devices on the cloud and things like that. But those are the kind of primary modes. If you're talking about access to data from a civilian perspective, I know at Seeker, we're obviously very interested in getting the wider community involved as well. Although this is a for-profit company, there's definitely scope for wider community engagement. I think we've all heard of kind of SETI at home, or maybe you can think of it as Seeker at home in some regards, where people would be able to potentially get access to some of our video streams to help us with data labeling, for instance, because being able to label your data is really critical to having robust models, AI models. And so by getting the community engaged and helping us label our data, that can contribute to much more robust models, which increases the likelihood of us actually picking up something anomalous. And then if we do detect something that's completely, it's been validated, we've seen it on different sensors, we've ruled out it being aircraft, we've ruled out it being boats or submarines or anything like that. If we're confident that this is something unusual, unknown, that data can be open sourced. It can be put out there, published in a paper, and it can be told, guys, go ahead, analyze it, tell us what you think. However, because the data is also part of our product, regular data that we collect on a daily basis, that is not pertinent to any sort of UAP event, that data probably won't be fully accessible. Maybe we'll do data dumps after every 5 years or 3 years or whatever. I'm just throwing out numbers here. But I think my point is that we are actively exploring ways in which we can make that data available to the wider community and get the wider community involved in this search for UAP, because I think we're all interested in it. And for too long now, we've been stuck basically waiting, relying on government and essentially gatekeepers to come out and tell us what's going on. But we're finally at the point now where off-the-shelf technology, with the advent of advanced AI, I think we're finally at the point where we're able to actually go out there now and find the answers for ourselves. We don't have to rely on the government or someone else to come out there and tell us the truth. We can collect the data ourselves and we can discover it for ourselves.
100%. Citizen disclosure powered by private sector science and hopefully some participatory citizen science is not only empowering, but it might actually be A, the way it happens, or B, something that facilitates other federal governments coming forward with what they know. If society itself is on the verge of its own discovery, and if people are engaged, if they have their cell phones pointed at the sky, they're engaging in collecting human intelligence, and that's being fused with other data sets. What a better environment in which governments can come forward and corroborate the discussion and the findings of society that it's coming to on its own. So super important. Yeah, I was trying to imagine the WOW signal, the equivalent of the WOW signal for Seeker and for underwater sensing. And so walk us through a little thought experiment. Let's imagine you guys are staring at the console in 5 years and you've got however many sentinels in this global network out there, and an anomalous object is tracked going at 300 knots. It's the size of a football field. What would happen next?
Well, I guess the very first thing is, the alert goes off, everyone goes crazy, and the immediate reaction is, well, let's tap into the camera feed and see what's going on there, and make sure that our systems are operating properly, collecting as high fidelity data as possible. see if there's any systems nearby that we can task to position itself to collect cooperative data. I think it's something that we're going to have to prepare for. We haven't got to the point here where we are doing kind of war games, let's call them, having these little exercises to see how it react. But that's absolutely something we're going to have to do.
Right.
Yeah,
because there could be multiple scenarios relating to multiple types of objects: small, large, super fast, super slow, a confluence of multiple objects static in one place. And of course, there's different marine environments, right? You guys know, I'm sure there's deep ocean, there's coastal, there's coral ecosystems, and so there's probably so much that to suss out regarding these different environments and what kind of objects might be detected. And then, of course, what's the response plan, right? You can say we detected this object moving at this speed, and you can write a paper about it. But what does a decision maker then do? Does that prompt some kind of a coordinated international response to a potential threat, or a potential not flight safety issue, but ocean faring issue? So how does that then feed into the decision-making processes of the global community?
It's a good question, and I think it really also depends on who we're collaborating with and who wants access to our data. For example, if we're collaborating with the Navy for some reason, and honestly, Seeker, especially at these early stages, we're not looking to collaborate with any sort of military connection. We don't want the gatekeepers having their hand anywhere near our what's the word?
Your sentinels, your community.
Yes, yeah. We don't want
autonomous individual vehicles.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And I'm sure they might have their own sensing platforms already, so they're taken care of. But they're not preferring the data and the insight to society. That's the problem.
Yeah. So there isn't.
Sure, go ahead.
I think for the immediate thing would really just be to first confirm that we found something unusual. We might see something. All signs indicate that we picked up something really interesting, but there's no way to tell instantaneously and verify instantaneously that you've picked up something unless you know exactly what you're looking for. So maybe as time goes, we'll eventually learn these kind of signatures and refine our methodology and be able to say, hey, this is happening again, let's act. But I think for the most part, it's going to be new events that happen, and it'll be a case that we've got this data, something unusual is going on, and we're going to go away, analyze it, make some conclusions, publish a paper, release the data, and then continue with the regular business activities.
Mm-hmm. Andriy, you wanted to interject something there.
Yeah, well, it's probably coming back to the what we discussed originally, right? So we will have set of outliers. We will have some set of statistically identified outliers in our data set coming from multiple data streams. And then the most important and probably the most difficult task will be to identify anomalies within those outliers. And anomalies can be, again, some strange new animals, some strange new species that came out. Recently, there are reports where we keep discovering new species really deep into the ocean. Mm-hmm. So what we are looking at and what those anomalies are, that's the biggest question, probably, and that's probably what drives us as a strategic vision and mission.
Yeah, great. I as I look out across the broad field of UAP detection technologies, not just UAP detection, any sensing of any environment, it looks like society broadly has the capability to effectively detect these anomalies and to confirm with hard evidence and on multiple platforms that they are what they are. They are hard structured vehicles going at certain speeds with certain kinematic tracks. And so, I know everyone is kind of siloed in this space and everyone's has their own project, their own startup, but is there a potential kind of field project that could be done between multiple organizations to go to a place of high UAP activity with multiple sensing instruments, whether it's optical, acoustic, radar, and camera, optical observing, and put all these resources in one place and verify what is happening in that place, be able to gain real deep insight, not into the broad planetary environment as a whole, but into that one location at that one time. Could you imagine a field research project like that with direct collaboration between organizations?
I think they could definitely have a collaboration like that. I mean, that would be fantastic, honestly. And I'm sure Seeker, the Galileo project, and everyone else would love to participate in something like that. But because UAP events are typically so fleeting, you can't predict when they might occur or how long they will last or what kind of way they'll manifest. It might be very difficult to coordinate that kind of activity, I think. If there was somewhere where we knew that it was happening every day for certain, we knew what signatures to look for, then I would think there would be a very strong case to go out there with multiple teams and try and collect data on independent systems to corroborate detection events.
Yeah, I know there are purported locations of high activity. You know, Catalina Island I mentioned, Skinwalker Ranch, everyone knows about that. I know Skywatcher is out in the desert at a certain location, and they're, they say, able to vector in these craft almost at will using the various technological psionic means that they claim to be using. And so it does seem that, you know, UAP activity is not a true scatter. There's a plot, right? There's a line. May not be a hard line. It might be a scatter plot, right? I'm not a scientist. I'm out of my wheelhouse there, but you know, there's probably some pattern of activity that relates to either geography or circumstantial events on the ground or time of day, time of year, right? And to identify what is that locus of activity, and then to get all of these capabilities into that one spot. Because I know Galileo project has, you know, really powerful optical capabilities, but they're expensive. There's not that many of these systems, right? And other projects like Skywatch have a very inexpensive system that's going to be deployed in a grid fashion. But all it's going to be able to detect is, you know, it's not going to be able to detect size or shape, just kinematic track of an object. You know, so there are all these capabilities. Some have, you know, very specific high fidelity capture of data. Some are much more broad. And if all of this could be fused together through some kind of coalition of technology startups and research organizations, it seems like we could gain significant insight, maybe within the next 5 years, into what are UAP, how are they structured, and what are they potentially even ultimately doing with society? Because, you know, there is a focus of UAP activity on urban centers, on certain, as I said, military installations, nuclear facilities. So there is potentially insight into the intentions and motivations of whatever is behind UAP by aggregating all of this data, creating such a coalition of technological capabilities and deploying them in the right place at the right time. So,
yeah, well, Reed, just kind of adding on my side, 100% truth. But and the timeline that you depict, 5 years, is valid. Meaning, it will take for us a lot of time for every group and for every set of sensors to figure out what the anomaly is in their perspective, and then down the road we will learn what those things are, and then eventually maybe we will able to summon them by request, as for example Skywatcher does, right? And then if we have it all at one place, we can then deploy our sensors, and with a full understanding of what we are looking at, then we can identify anomalies and kind of confirm or workarounds and trying to understand what we are looking at. But small teams and small groups that are currently start to work, it kind of reminded me we're just at the beginning. All of the groups at the beginning, we are trying to navigate, trying to understand, trying to align and adjust our sensors, learn our models, and as soon as it's ready, probably at some point we will be ready to. All of us will be ready, to bring it to the next level.
Right. Yeah, so true. I mean, a lot of these companies are in the beginning phases. I think we're societally late to the project of detecting and tracking such craft. And the public is eager for answers, in fact, demanding answers. You know, we just had well over 9 months of this anomalous, quote unquote, drone mysterious activity. As you guys watched that unfold in society and you saw the news coverage and you saw the statements from both administrations, what was going through your minds? How did you see that? And what did that tell you about the need in the UAP research space?
I think, as scientists, it's tricky. You can't straightforward give in to like something interesting is going on. I want to go and see what's going on there, deploy instruments and stuff, because you have to be skeptical by nature, and I think most scientists are. But you also have to be open-minded as to that it might actually be something completely unusual. So the usual step is to observe, see what's happening, see if there's anything interesting that warrants further investigation. I think there's a lot of misinformation out on the internet as well. It's very difficult to understand whether something really interesting like a UAP flap is unfolding, or it's just some misinformation about what's actually happening, some military exercise or whatever. But personally, like, I was very intrigued. I didn't get to go out there and actually investigate or capture any data as much as I would have liked to. But it was very suspicious that these drones were everywhere, basically, and that everyone was reporting them. Not just one or two people, but like multiple people per night reporting them. And how there'd been so many cases already of these drones supposedly over military bases, and how they'd actually moved entire squadrons from a military base to another base simply because of drone incursions. That's completely unheard of. And then to come out and say,
Patterson Air Force Base, center of the F-22 squadron, I believe. I mean, this is not just any jet they're moving. This is the marquee platform in the U.S. Air Force military arsenal.
Exactly. And then these conflicting messages, right? Like, oh, it's just a military exercise, or it's FAA approved drones. Why would you have drone incursions into your own military bases if that's the case? At least be honest with people. People are completely capable of accepting that there's something weird going on, but you have to just be honest. Don't continuously give out these weird mixed signals, and then it does nothing but actually harm the government, the trust in government, I think, in the long run. So I would love to have gone out there and actually captured some data, but didn't have the chance.
Right. It seemed as if something was forcing a crisis upon the government. It didn't even look like pure incompetence or intransience. It's as if something was foisting itself onto the government, and it was unable or unwilling to credibly respond to it. New Jersey, Picantley Arsenal, of course, Lakenheath, these nuclear facilities in the UK, and then Ramstein in Germany.
That's right.
There was a unique profile to this. We'll call it a drone flap, because we don't have credible, verified information that there were UAP in it. Although some say there were, some were out there in the field. I think of the Tedesco Nightcrawler group out there collecting information on spheroids. That I talked to both of the Tedesco brothers about it, and they showed me some pretty compelling footage of these spheroids being chased off by much more traditional quadcopter or military drone-like aircraft. So there seemed to be some kind of altercation in the air, and of course here the government is fumbling through every news press conference, unable to give any credible answers. So definitely, I would say an anomalous event, whatever the craft or the technological factor was, it was anomalous. And I know a lot of people were reporting a transmedium quality to the drone activity. These were reported to have been going into the ocean. There was speculation about a Chinese submarine or a ship launching small drones, which is almost ridiculous that a foreign adversary would steam one of their vessels right into U.S. territorial waters and start launching drones over U.S. cities and not think that there would be a massive government response to that. So very strange. I'm curious, once Seeker is deployed and out in the field, would you be able to bring multiple of these devices into a place of high concentration, like off the coast of New Jersey, to begin to collect data on the spot?
Yeah, as long as the U.S. Navy doesn't blow us out the water, I don't see why not.
Right. And
we definitely want to do that.
Okay. Is it legal and lawful for you guys to drop one of these unmanned systems wherever you choose and to begin to collect data?
That's also a good question. I mean, there are obviously territorial waters. Each country has their own territorial waters, and so there is regulations around there. Once you get into international waters, of course, there's no like real legally binding laws, let's say. So we can go and put sensors onto the ocean and stuff, but there are international norms, let's say, conventions. And so I think depending how far it is on the ocean, we'd be fine as long as we have the correct equipment on board, like the AIS transponder, something that kind of broadcasts our location and lets other vessels in the area know where we are, so we're not presenting any sort of hazard.
Right.
But if it comes to territorial waters, I think it might be a bit more tricky. I don't have the answer for that yet, but
it'll be frustrating if a government agency steps in and says, yes, we know there's a lot of purported activity in the air over the New Jersey coast, but you can't drop your anomaly sensing platform into the harbor.
Tim Gallaudet, Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, he's one of my advisors actually. So maybe this is a question we should ask him.
Right.
He might have
does the international community need to start talking about an amendment to whatever treaties govern international waters to allow for necessary anomaly detection?
Maybe we should not talk about this so that they don't draw up any regulations and prevent us from
exactly. We go quiet right until launch so that they won't.
Or maybe we first of all should deploy it and then be ready to kick it out, and then we are fine. Yeah, we get some data and
Right. Just to satisfy my own curiosity, as you guys were talking about the Seeker project and this global network of sentinels in a grid, operating in a grid fashion, I just imagined, would it be possible to put one of these sensing instruments on the bottom of most commercial ships? Since the ocean is being transited every day by ocean freight and other vessels, and even leisure craft, it's almost like, do we need a Winston Churchill moment here and marshal the leisure craft of the West and get some insight into the ocean that way?
I'm so glad you asked, Reed, because Andriy and I have been battling with this kind of question for a long time now, because it's going to take a long time to build up a network of USVs. They're complicated, they're expensive. All those customers are going to really be business to business, and so we were thinking, well, what can we do in the meantime? And so we've been rattling our brain around there, and we've come up with a portable system that we hope we can put onto any commercial vessel, wind farm, or basically any marine-based environment. It's fully weatherized. It's got the cameras on there and ADS-B and acoustic system and stuff like that. And the idea is to simply just connect. You plug it, you put it onto your yacht or your boat or whatever. Plug in the power, plug in the network. And away you go. You've got an interface. You can see the data feeds coming live, and suddenly returning every vessel out there, every dock, every wind farm or whatever, into a node in our network. So we can start building out this network well before we start actually building our own USVs. And that will give us data, obviously, for training our models. It'll help us expand our network to a point where we have different streams from different fidelities. Yeah, great question. And yeah.
Seems like a great stepping stone to a future scenario. Oh, go ahead, Andriy. Yes.
Yeah, also, it's just some kind of confirming, and I'm surprised that you asked that. So we decided to do the two different kind of product lines. One product is going to be housing and enclosures where we can put all our sensors on someone else's ship. And another one is more like strategic vision, strategic goal to get to the gliders and put sensors on the gliders. And so to build up the network and carry data streams from the multiple locations, not only that will be deployed at the point of interest on our own gliders, but on someone else. And everybody is going to be, part of that network.
Yeah, and we can take these portable systems that we're building, and when it comes time to actually building our own USVs, that sensor apparatus will be already built and ready to go, tried and tested and out there on the ocean. So there's no need to develop an entirely new sensor platform for our USVs. We can just take this system and integrate it into our new autonomous unmanned surface vehicles. So it'll make the transition from these portable systems to a fleet of USVs much easier.
Right, and I can imagine, much like, a tech company went from making computers to making chips that other computer makers could put in their computer. I could imagine you guys could develop a sensor kit that maybe other unmanned,
Sure.
surface vehicles could deploy on theirs. And so you get out of the ship making business, which looks expensive and costly and regulatory, and go into the sensor making business, much like Apple did and IBM. Well, Apple stayed in the computer making business actually, but IBM certainly went into the chip, as did Intel. Yeah,
Exactly.
well, guys, this is fascinating and great to get a little bit of a feel of the front lines of USO and marine anomaly detection. This is not a topic most people are aware is being looked at, let alone being tackled at a technological level. So thank you both for doing so. I'm curious if we can just briefly touch on, go from the craft, the potential craft, to talk about the controller, because that's on a lot of people's minds, is who's behind the wheel. What's operating these potential structured vehicles, and for what purpose? And I'm just curious. We're stepping out of the seeker, science world to just to talk as fellow students of the phenomenon. But what's your sense of the most plausible theories of UAP or potential NHI origin?
Wow.
So, sorry, Richard. So, right. So
No,
it's just
go for it.
because, yeah. So it's just the topic is so broad that that's exactly the reason why scientific community stepped in and trying to solve it, because there are so many different variables in this equation. We can think of the military, right, who do their studies and do their research, and they, put things out for whatever reason. We can think of the green aliens who came here and trying to do, sky surveillance on us. We can think of the biologics. We can think of the, some biological objects, UAP as an animal by itself, without, being driven by any sort of green alien inside. So there are so many different possibilities that we can think of. And as I said, because it seems to be historically, people observed the things for a long time, and there is a high chance that it's coexisted with us for a long time. Mm-hmm. And so whatever it can be, right? Either it's, I've been always surprised by the fact that if we discover some new species in the ocean, or even in the, in the forest, like new ants or new bacteria, people are not surprised. They think it just as a given, right? There is, okay, another species. But when we discover something that we suspect is much more superior than us, then we become surprised and scared. Though those are probably on the same scale or on the evolutionary tree, right? We have something that is unknown, and the only way to answer it is probably to get scientific community. And it also can be merged. Some of the things that we observed come from the military. Some of the things that we mistook for the military crafts or military airplanes. For example, David Fravor, in one of his podcasts, told that military actually play jokes during their training flights with the campers. So there are many things to think of when we are talking about UAPs, and green aliens is probably the smallest portion of it.
And when you say green, do you mean gray? Or are you thinking little green men? The
little green men sitting in the craft and trying to fly from the space from one stars to another stars.
Right.
And generally speaking, if the life exists on the Earth, it should have existed somewhere else, because the chance of us being unique is very little. Mm-hmm. So you would expect that if we have bacteria and evolution happening here, it should have been someone else as well. The question is to which extent and how they can travel. So there are multiple possibilities for us to explore. I mean, there are many possibilities to explore, to be honest. So I don't have any answer. My answer is that everything is equally probable in this respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a little bit of a problem of category inflation with this UAP phrase, because it's unidentified anomalous phenomena. Okay, we're talking about a basket of potentially unrelated phenomena, natural phenomena, human-made. I mean, it's so broad, right? And I go back often to take the statement by Leslie Kane, that we are observing a hard physical phenomenon of structured craft with radical flight characteristics and performance capabilities that have been observed on sensing instruments that sense physical objects. So I know everyone wants to expand into consciousness and you know all the potentials of the universe, but we are, if we can take it in a compartmentalized approach to some degree and say, look, what is this hard physical technological phenomenon, you know, and just tackle that. I think that starts to narrow, you know, the spectrum of possibilities to some more probable explanations. Not to say that it's one thing; it could be multiple, for sure. And you know, we could be just inching out into a larger interstellar exosystem of interacting life forms, and we are interfacing with half a dozen all at the same time that are somewhat unrelated or highly related. We don't know. So yeah, I don't want to assume that it's one thing. It's got to be one scenario, but I also don't want to expand into theories of everything, right? Because I just don't think we can tackle it in that fashion.
Yeah. I think one compelling case is potentially that, you know, we're starting to explore the frontiers now of AI. We're starting to witness, I think, a paradigm shift in computing and intelligence, let's say, artificial intelligence. Models are constantly surprising us, and it's very clear that things are going to continue to evolve. New capabilities are going to emerge, things that we didn't think were possible a few years ago. And it might be that some of the UAP, and of course this is speculation, and as my having a scientific training, it's quite difficult. It's out of my comfort zone, I think, to speculate on these things, but it's still fun. So I'm going to speculate that it's possible that what we're seeing in some form might actually be advanced AI probes. If you were, for example, to visit another planet, let's say, and there were intelligent beings there, you might not necessarily want to get down there, like in the weeds with the guys, and, you know, fumble around in the bush and try and understand them from that perspective. You might want to deploy autonomous systems to go out there and do data collection, and that might be, I think, probably one of the strongest hints of that being the case might be with Jake Barber and, you know, having this dog whistle. Why would a sentient, intelligent being react to a signal? To me, that signifies that this is some sort of signal that an autonomous system is picking up on and is reacting to, if that's all true. So I would speculate that at least some of the craft are most likely drones. But I also think that there is a strong consciousness component to this, and I don't mean that in the kind of maybe the woo kind of feel. I mean that more as in, for example, you walk out into your yard and there's a rabbit there. Well, let's actually start smaller. Let's say you walk out into your yard and there's an ant. The ant's running around. You can see the ant. You can study the ant, but the ant has no idea that you're even there. It's going about its daily business. It's, you know, you can put your finger on the ground and it'll bump into it and it'll run around. It'll have no concept that you're there, that this is your finger, what that finger represents, what you represent. And then if you scale that up and you say, okay, now we've got a rabbit. Well, the rabbit will see you. It'll potentially see you as a threat, but it'll have no idea that you're a human being, that you are some super intelligent being that's constructing skyscrapers and going to different planets. Same as your dog, you can scale that up. The dog is a lot smarter than the ant and a lot smarter than the rabbit, and it can communicate with you, but on a very service level. So I imagine that if there are other beings out there, that there are other forms of intelligence that are much more evolved than us, that as I think Gary Nolan and Tom DeLonge in Monsters of California, I think, alluded, that they're everywhere all around us, that there's a shadow biosphere. And in my mind, that signifies to me that these are things that are all around us that we just cannot necessarily perceive. Not necessarily because we don't have the hardware, the brain power, something like that, but maybe just because we haven't yet learned to interpret the signals that we're receiving. We have only like 5 senses. Who knows what's going on around there? You know, how much of our our brain is not utilized. How many of these these signals are flying around, like radio signals? We can't actually, or infrared, we can't actually see these and perceive these with our limited human bodies. It doesn't mean that they're not there. So maybe as time goes by and we develop new technologies, maybe they will somehow expand our consciousness, whatever that means. I mean, we don't even have a definition for consciousness. We don't even have a definition for intelligence. So maybe at some point we'll be able to start peeling back these kind of layers and starting to understand what we're dealing with. But I think we're very far long way from that. But I really agree that focusing on like the physical aspects is a really good approach, because that's something we can relate to. We can say there's something physical there, it interacts with our physical reality, our matter, and from that we can start to, piece things together and build some sort of foundation on which we can start drawing some conclusions. But to start from the the top and say, oh, everything is floating around us and is in consciousness and stuff, I don't think we're going to get very far from there, because we don't have a grasp on what consciousness is.
Right. Really well said. I really appreciated your thoughts there. And it's interesting. Consciousness, right? Perception. Are we able to even perceive the event taking place? Well, largely no. And it's not actually because it's outside of our five senses. It's outside of what we allow our five senses to detect and to report to the sensing instrument of our brain. People ontologically refuse to entertain the possibility that somebody saw a craft, or that video is actually authentic of a UAP, for example. So that is an internal sensing short circuit or limitation, we'll call it that can be surpassed within the context of one's own consciousness, you could say. And so I fully agree. And yet, yes, the physical aspect of this phenomenon, it's verified. Physicality also means it can incur real physical effects upon our physical bodies. So there is a public safety, a responsible stewardship component to UAP research that would compel us to focus on the physicality, but not to say that is all and everything. We can allow for possibilities to extend beyond, but where do you focus your limited and timely response capabilities? I would say to the hard physical phenomenon, like Leslie King called it. So really important. And, I just wanted to come back to something you said, Andriy, about 30 minutes ago about communication, that there is a communication aspect to this. And, this is where the scientific method is super important and has to be engaged in decoding this phenomenon. But can it take us all the way to understanding the nature of what might actually be a relationship, right, between two sentiences, ours and another? And so what is the science of relationship? Or understanding the nature of relating. And this is where we do get into other fields of human knowledge beyond just science, in my view.
Because 100%. I agree with you. Yeah. Well, it's probably a much broader discussion. Scientifically, we want to prove physicality, right? Whether they exist or not, and what types of them are. But if they're much superior, for example, if they are much superior or whatever, regardless of what nature stands behind them, there is definitely I foresee, and there are a few very nice European authors that wrote multiple fiction stories regarding the humans who will be, communicating with the new species, new entities, and these bright minds, envision humans eventually to get in touch with some sort of larger, more significant entities at the end of the day. There is this also in the house called, I think Lem is one of the European writer. He introduced the concept.
Say the name again, Andriy. Give us the name again.
Lem. His last name is Lem, I think.
Lem. Okay.
Yes. So he introduced concept of Solaris. It's where the humans are going to be involved to such extent they don't need bodies anymore. So they simply communicate by connecting all of the brains into the one large Solaris, which is covered whole their own planet. And so it's the communication in relation to something that is unknown is probably what is driving humanity historically, and that's probably where we're all going to. Whatever we are going to face in the animals, or maybe technology, or maybe something new. The psychological aspect of it is going to be probably the most important one, regardless what we are going to face eventually.
Fascinating. What is driving us forward is that we are in relationship to something unknown, or in communication with.
Yes,
I love
yes.
that. And I mean, if you take a religious perspective, if you account for the fact that there might be a super consciousness pushing the universe forward, I would call that the unknown. I would call that outside the bounds of knowability by my human brain. And are we in relationship with that? Is that compelling us? I would say many people would say yes. And I love that, science and, especially the science of anomalous phenomena can embrace that side of the coin and pursue understanding within a much larger context of unknowability, ultimate unknowability.
Right.
But there has to be some knowability for immediate response and for the protection of life and liberty and property and everything else. It's just the functional reality.
Right, and the most striking is that it's been predicted. It's been foreseen by others in the past. Everything that's been envisioned by the fiction writers or any sort of poeters, it's here. I mean, they've described these things before, and I'm surprised how there seems to be new up on the front what we're going to face in the future.
Well, gentlemen, this has been a great conversation. Appreciate exploring your project and just your thoughts on the phenomenon. And I love hearing from the minds of those who are scientists and engineers. I love your thought processes. Just to close up, I want to ask you, I can imagine you both are giving a lot of time and energy to the projects that you're working on. What inspires you? What fuels you? What are you seeking in this inquiry that you're involved in?
Just knowledge, I think. I mean, I think as any sentient being, if you're not actively trying to learn and discover new things, you're not really living. So the whole point here is really just to push the boundaries of what we know and understand. And we're all on this floating rock in the middle of nowhere together. So let's try and figure out what's going on, because ultimately it's going to benefit everyone.
How about for you, Andriy?
Well, emotion, right? The lack of an unknown or lack of known. As I said, personally, I myself follow intuition, and so by that intuition, at the end of the day, becomes reality. Is probably one of the most exciting part of this project, of what we think we're going to encounter eventually. So emotion, probably.
Thank you for that. Great perspectives, you guys. I love that. This is our own sensing instrument called the human mind, the human consciousness, right? It's steering us through emotional means, mysterious, intuitive means, noetic means, the need to understand, to comprehend our own environment. So I resonate with you both on this, and thank you so much for your work with the Galileo project and with Seeker. We will be following the developments closely and supporting you in any way we can. And thank you for working towards this fundamental capability to detect and to understand anomalous objects and potential craft within the marine environment. I think it might sound at first a little deep in and nerdy and high tech, but I think it's foundational. It's a basic capability of potentially a functional civilization to understand what is going on in the various domains of its planetary system. And the ocean, as you said, Richard, at the beginning, is largely unknown to us. And regardless of what UAP are, if UAP are, we have to know what is happening within the marine environment. So with that, gentlemen, I will begin to close up here. And we're going to put on screen some links for the viewers to learn more about your project. So seeker.net is the website of the Seeker project. We've got the Galileo project website listed as well, and some social media links for both Richard and Andriy. So check those out. One more little insight and possibly an exigency to really see the need for ocean sensing in the context of UAP. There's talk about a secretive arms race for technologies of potential non-human origin, and that these technologies might have unknown ramifications for the global community. When we imagine a reverse engineered alien reproduction vehicle, as it is being surmised, possibly a triangle, an orb, an object the size of an SUV or a small aircraft. Imagine instead an underwater craft the size of a football field, going hundreds of knots, chasing nuclear-powered and nuclear-armed submarines. If you don't understand why we need ocean sensing and the ability to detect, monitor, and better understand the presence of these anomalous craft in the ocean, then I think that says it pretty much full on. So there couldn't be a more important domain for us to increase our awareness and responsiveness within, and to facilitate coordinated international response to. And so I'm very excited about any capabilities we can develop to understand the marine environment and anomalous craft transiting that environment. I think it's a basic capability that the human civilization needs to have, and it is a requisite capability for the international community, if only to avoid the unknown risks and hazards of technological surprise of one another, of miscommunication and miscoordination between nuclear superpowers. And in a hair trigger world where there are many conflicts already underway or about to erupt, we cannot afford to allow there to be craft of these performance capabilities and characteristics operating in international and national territorial waters as they are. So this is the exigency as I see it. This was my inspiration to bring Richard and Andriy on the show to talk about Seeker. Thank you all very much for joining me on Emergent. I look forward to our conversations up ahead, especially on my new platform called Forerunner, which will be launching in several weeks' time. And with that, I also invite you to consider registering for my course on decoding the intent of non-human intelligence, where I will be using a variety of functional practices and frameworks to begin to use the observable phenomenon of UAP and potential NHI and the various patterns and trends that this phenomenon is giving us to decode the possible motivations and intentions of whatever the intelligence is that is behind this phenomenon. So with that, you can hit my website. The course is there for you to register for, and we will be, I'll be offering 4 live sessions to the Forerunner community, and that will start May 21st. So with that, thank you so much for joining me. I'll say good night, and I'll see you on the next episode of Emergent.